She said, "I don't want your opinion. Just do exactly what I tell you." So I did, word for word. No warnings, no pushback, no rescue. 48 hours later, she was standing in a conference room trying to explain how her better idea had just cost the company $600,000. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know why I hadn't stopped her. For almost 9 years, I worked in logistics operations for a regional medical supply distributor called Northline Clinical. We weren't glamorous, but we were important in the deeply unsexy, extremely necessary kind of way. We handled hospital inventory movement, specialty refrigeration shipments, emergency replacement equipment, and timed deliveries for clinics that absolutely did not have the luxury of hearing, "Sorry, we'll try again next week." If a surgery center needed a replacement pump, if a dialysis clinic was short on filters, if a hospital lab had temperature-sensitive reagents that couldn't sit on a loading dock for 2 hours, we were the people making sure that stuff moved exactly when and where it had to. That kind of work teaches you one very important lesson fast. The people who think logistics is just trucks and boxes are almost always the ones most likely to destroy something expensive. My job title was Senior Routing and Compliance Coordinator, which sounds like the sort of thing invented by HR after a meeting with a thesaurus. But in practice, it meant I was the person who caught disasters before they happened. I knew which hospital docks closed early on Fridays, which counties required hazmat route disclosures, which carriers lied about reefer calibration, which vendors consistently underpacked, and which simple delivery changes could quietly detonate 6 figures worth of product if the wrong person got cocky. For years, that system worked because my old boss, Gary, was the rare kind of manager who understood the difference between authority and competence. He didn't need to know every detail. He just needed to know who did. Then Gary retired and corporate sent us Rebecca. Rebecca arrived with the exact energy of someone who had once read half a LinkedIn post about operational efficiency and decided she was a supply chain visionary. She was maybe 36, wore blazers like they were battle armor, and had the kind of smile that said, "I've never once admitted I was wrong in a meeting." Her background, as far as anyone could tell, was mostly in strategic transformation, which is executive code for PowerPoint and ruining functional departments from a safe distance. Within 2 weeks, she had already reorganized reporting lines nobody asked her to touch, changed 3 vendor approval workflows that had been stable for years, and started using phrases like, "We need to challenge legacy assumptions," every time someone explained why a regulation existed. I knew we were doomed the first time she interrupted me during a routing review and said, "You guys are too attached to exceptions. Good systems shouldn't need this much tribal knowledge." That sentence sounds harmless until you realize tribal knowledge is what people like her call the stuff that keeps refrigerated pharmaceuticals from rotting in Kansas. Still, I tried. I really did. I gave her clean summaries, explained the high-risk accounts, documented the temperature-sensitive lanes, and built her a simple escalation matrix showing which client shipments could not be rerouted, consolidated, delayed, or relabeled without sign-off. She nodded through all of it like she was humoring a child explaining dinosaurs. Then came the account that ruined her. Westbridge Health Network was one of our biggest clients, 7 hospitals, multiple outpatient centers, and one very large annual inventory refresh tied to a contract milestone with performance penalties built into the service agreement. In plain English, if we messed up the timing, custody chain, or temperature integrity on their scheduled equipment and reagent rollout, the penalties would be brutal. That quarter, we were handling a particularly sensitive batch, a mixed-value outbound consisting of diagnostic modules, specialty reagents, monitored components, and support units split across 4 facilities. Total shipment value? Just over $600,000. It was the kind of move you do carefully, slowly, and with exactly 0 ego. We had a plan, a good one. The routing was sequenced by dock window, cold chain integrity, and custody verification requirements. The manifest had staggered unload instructions. The carrier assignment was specific for a reason, and then Rebecca looked at the route map and decided she hated it. "Why are we sending this in 3 waves?" she asked. I explained, "Because Facility B couldn't receive before 10:30. Facility C required direct signature from a restricted receiving manager, and the cold chain units for Facility D couldn't sit in the truck while the non-temp controlled equipment got unloaded elsewhere." She tapped the spreadsheet with one manicured nail and said, "This is overcomplicated." I said, "It's compliant." She said, "It's inefficient." I said, "It's the only way to keep the chain intact." She leaned back in her chair and gave me the exact look bad bosses always give right before they make something everyone else will have to clean up. "No," she said. "What it is old thinking." Then she proposed her masterpiece: consolidate the entire West Bridge outbound into one optimized same-day route using a lower-cost regional carrier she had just approved because they came in 11% cheaper on a quarterly bid comparison. There were several problems with this, and by several, I mean enough to qualify as a business-ending personality disorder. First, that carrier didn't have a verified refrigerated split compartment on the assigned unit. Second, they had never handled Westbridge's chain of custody protocol. Third, Rebecca's revised route required the truck to hit the farthest site first, which would push 2 timed unloads into non-compliant windows and leave temperature-sensitive product sitting longer than the validated plan allowed. Fourth, and my personal favorite, her efficiency move merged serialized equipment with controlled storage materials under one custody sequence, which meant one bad receiving delay could contaminate the documentation chain for everything after it. I told her all of that, calmly, clearly, in writing. She hated that, because people like Rebecca don't actually want expertise. They want applause wearing a lanyard. She cut me off halfway through and said, "I'm your boss, not your debate partner." Then, in front of 2 supervisors and one very uncomfortable analyst, she delivered the line that eventually cost her more than most houses. "I don't want your opinion. I want compliance. Do exactly what I'm telling you." I should probably thank her for being so specific, because from that moment on, I became the most obedient employee in the building. I documented her instruction in a follow-up email. "Per your direction, I will proceed with the consolidated Westbridge routing plan using the newly approved carrier and revised stop order. Please confirm no additional routing exceptions or custody adjustments are to be applied." She replied 3 minutes later, "Correct. Execute as instructed." That email became my favorite document for the next 6 months. Once I had it, I stopped saving her from herself. That's the thing about malicious compliance done properly. It's not sabotage. It's not revenge. It's simply stepping out of the way and allowing a bad decision to reach its natural, fully documented conclusion. So I executed her plan exactly. No undocumented exceptions. No helpful side fixes. No quiet phone calls to carrier dispatch to compensate for what she'd broken. I booked the carrier she chose. I loaded according to the consolidated manifest she approved. I issued the route sequence exactly as instructed, and then I watched. The first crack showed up before the truck even hit the second stop. Facility A took longer than expected because the dock coordinator was covering 2 bays, and the new carrier didn't know how to stage the serial scan paperwork properly. That delay alone pushed the arrival at Facility B outside the validated receiving prep window. They still took the non-temp units, but refused to sign for the cold chain segment until their pharmacy intake lead could inspect the logger. That burned another 40 minutes. Then the reefer unit, because of course it did, threw a temp fluctuation alert while idling in the lot because the truck had not been configured for the split load hold profile we normally require. Not catastrophic yet, but enough to trigger review. By the time the driver reached Facility C, the restricted receiver had already left for an off-site compliance audit because, as I had explained in the routing meeting Rebecca treated like a TED Talk interruption, That site had a hard intake cutoff. No restricted receiver, no chain acceptance. The driver called dispatch. Dispatch called our floor. My analyst looked at me like a man staring at a fire extinguisher mounted behind glass. "Should we intervene?" he whispered. I asked one question. "Do we have revised authorization from Rebecca?" He said no. I said, "Then follow the approved route." He blinked once, then nodded. Because here's the important part. I wasn't being petty in secret. I was being professionally obedient in daylight. And daylight is where stupid dies best. The driver had no choice but to continue to Facility D with cargo that now included partially delayed, partially temp flagged, partially unsigned inventory tied to multiple receiving conditions. Facility D rejected the controlled storage portion immediately because the custody sequence was compromised. That rejection triggered a cascade. The serialized diagnostic units associated with that segment could no longer be booked as installed on arrival. The reagents tied to the temp alert went into hold pending QA review. The support units for Facility C had to be returned because the chain paperwork had been broken by the stop order delay. By 4:20 p.m., the entire shipment had transformed from scheduled contract milestone into multi-site containment event, which is corporate for, oh no. Rebecca didn't realize how bad it was until the next morning. She had spent the afternoon before in what she called leadership alignment sessions, which I think is just executive habitat for meetings where nothing measurable survives. At 8:06 a.m., she stormed onto the operations floor holding a printout of the exception report like it had personally betrayed her. "What happened?" she snapped. I turned to my screen, opened the routing approval chain, and said, "The plan was executed as instructed." She said, "Why didn't anyone stop this?" That question was so beautiful, I almost wanted it framed. I pulled up the email, then the meeting notes, then the route summary with the compliance risks I had outlined. Then her reply, "Execute as instructed." You could actually see the moment she remembered writing it. She tried to pivot fast. "I assumed you would use judgment," she said. I said, "You explicitly instructed me not to apply routing exceptions." She said, "That's not what I meant." I said, "That's what you wrote." Silence. Then she did what all bad managers do when reality corners them. She called a meeting, a big one. Westbridge's account lead, QA, finance, operations, client services, and 3 executives from regional leadership all got dragged into a conference room by 10 a.m. I brought my laptop, a notepad, and the emotional calm of a man who had packed a parachute weeks ago. Rebecca opened with a masterpiece of passive voice. "A series of execution failures occurred yesterday," she said, as if the route had assembled itself out of office supplies and bad karma. Then the VP of Client Operations asked the question that ended her. "Was the approved handling plan changed?" I said, "Yes." He looked at me. "By whom?" And there it was, the cliff, the whole room waiting. Rebecca trying to telepathically set me on fire. I turned my laptop toward the table and said, "Per written instruction from Rebecca, the shipment was consolidated, reassigned to a lower-cost carrier, and rerouted against the original compliance sequence. I raised the risks in advance and executed the final approved plan as directed." Nobody spoke for about 4 full seconds, which in executive time is roughly the emotional equivalent of a car crash. Then finance asked for the impact estimate. QA had already done the ugly math. Between rejected units, replacement logistics, compromised reagents, emergency revalidation, service credits, and contractual penalty exposure from missing Westbridge's milestone window, the immediate financial hit was projected at just under $600,000. Rebecca physically sat down harder after hearing that. It was one of the most satisfying sounds I've ever experienced indoors. And because the universe occasionally loves precision, Westbridge's procurement lead joined the call 12 minutes later and said, in the coldest professional tone imaginable, We want to understand why your team deviated from the validated plan without our authorization. Not how do we fix it? Not what happened? Why did you do this? Rebecca tried to answer. She used words like optimization, agility, and operational improvement. Westbridge let her finish and then said, "That is not an acceptable answer." The call ended with an escalation notice, a formal incident review, and a request for all internal decision records tied to the routing change, which meant my emails, which meant her order, which meant she was done. Officially, it took another 3 weeks. Unofficially, she died in that conference room. Corporate put her on special project assignment almost immediately, which is what companies call putting someone in a broom closet with Outlook while legal figures out how to make them disappear quietly. An internal review followed. People who had ignored my concerns suddenly became deeply interested in my documentation habits. The lower-cost carrier got suspended. The Westbridge account survived, but only after a humiliating round of credits, emergency remediation, and enough apology language to choke a horse. And Rebecca? She was no longer with the organization by the end of the month. No farewell email. No LinkedIn victory post about growth and transitions. Just gone. Vaporized by the very efficiency theater she'd built her identity around. The funniest part is that after she left, one of the directors pulled me aside and said, "You should have pushed harder." That one almost made me laugh out loud. Because I did push harder. In the meeting, in the notes, in the email. What they really meant was, you should have saved someone more powerful than you from the consequences of ignoring you. And that's the part people like Rebecca never understand until it's too late. Expertise is not a decorative accessory. It's not there to make management feel challenged. It's there because reality is full of expensive edges, and some of us know where they are. She thought obedience would prove she was in charge. Instead, it proved something much more useful. That authority without humility is just a countdown timer wearing heels. These days, I still work in logistics. Same chaos, same impossible timelines, same occasional executive who thinks compliance is a mood. But whenever someone starts getting a little too confident, I just remember Rebecca and her beautiful career-ending sentence, "Do exactly what I tell you." I did, and she lost 600 grand learning why that was a terrible idea. So tell me, if your new boss ordered you to ignore your experience and do it their way, would you have obeyed exactly too? Drop your opinion in the comments, and subscribe for more malicious compliance, workplace revenge, and satisfying real-life stories.